This is a production of Cornell University.
You're looking at it today, or you're listening to it today. It's myself and my close colleague, Carl Scamenti, to handle the show today. We may, just to make it a nice, even 10 weeks, have a show next week that I believe I'll be doing solo. Carl will be out and about doing other things. And it's always been a 10-week thing, right, Carl? It was never, it's like we want to get you going right. And then, we're out and about through the summer doing all our stuff. But the story for this week is our national champion Division I lacrosse team. And to listen to the broadcast on ESPN, and how they talked about how Ithaca's a hotbed for lacrosse, how the coach at Maryland played at Cornell, how the coach at this place played at Cornell, Richie Moran this, Richie Moran that, to be able then to hoist the trophy, right, and see a group of young men really relish. And I got to tell you, big crowd, Carl, big crowd.
Yeah.
At the event, big turnout for the Big Red. This has to be the biggest national championship we've had in a lot of years. You'd know better than me. For sure not in golf, huh, brother?
No, we're not a championship golf school.
Anyway, we also had in the same year CJ Kirst, who I didn't know this kid from Adam until I started watching lacrosse. A big lacrosse family, long history of lacrosse in his family, comes here, sets the single season NCAA scoring record for lacrosse, right? And the thing I notice about this team, even our Yankees, Carl, they're deep. You lose one guy, you got two more good guys standing right there that would be number ones on other teams. And I think that's the measure of, Connor Busick's approach here to this winning team. I got to tell you, we were talking about this earlier. I watched this young man run in a circle at the end of the semifinal game at top speed. He looks pretty big and he's moving pretty good. And I'm thinking about, he's running 360, and every time he hits, he's doing maximum force and rotation because he's trying to run in a circle. He's never actually heading in a straight line. And I'm just thinking about the multitude of chances, Carl, that could lead to some issues. And we're going to talk about traffic today, but we don't want to leave our golf guys behind. I pulled this off of X the other day, this golf course superintendent. I gained access to the cart tracking system, and now he just feels nauseous looking at the amount of traffic. But again, this is what we talk about all the time, Carl, and why we spend a lot of time talking about traffic. Organic matter, growth regulating properties. We did it with Doug. We did it with Evan Machete on other surfaces. Now you and I are going to do a little bit of a deep dive. But let me start with the weather. And, if you haven't noticed in the northeastern United States, or if you were dry for a few minutes, you're not dry anymore. Most places are pretty wet and are expected to continue to be wet. So I found our soil saturation data, Carl. I found our soil saturation data that looks at how saturated is the top 2 inches. Look at the amount of soil in central New York where we are, Carl, that's at 80 to 100%. I'm sure my farm, not my pigs, love this. This is a mud maker paradise. So lots of soil moisture throughout the state, really very few places less than 20% soil saturation. And it looks like it's going to get worse in the next couple of days through the Hudson Valley, and lo and behold, a little bit on us here in central New York, maybe drying out a little bit more in the Adirondacks and around the metro New York area. And you're talking about, the 3rd of June, next Tuesday or Wednesday, you'll still have most of the state at 40%, 60% soil saturation, right? Still maybe around the metro area around 20%. But Carl, take a minute here and tell me a little bit about, what this means to you from a percent saturation perspective. Would you say at all moisture is limiting anywhere in the state of New York growth?
No, yeah, and one of the things, soil saturation is different from volumetric water content, right? So this is saying you have whatever your soil type is in New York, um, how much of the available room for water is taken up by water right now. So a clay soil that can hold 40%, maybe even 45% soil, 80% saturation is still like 37, 38% volumetric water content. In a sand, where you only hold maybe 22, 25% soil moisture, that 80% number is lower, 18%. So really what it's doing is sands will dry down quicker, and the light green stuff you see here probably is either a sandy soil or an area that hasn't gotten rain in a while, and some of that water's matriculated
Yeah, I
through.
set this for the loamy soil,
For a
right?
loamy
I
soil,
set
okay.
this for a loam. And again, you can go around and play around. But the point we're trying to make is you're not going to tell me guys have had to irrigate, Carl, to grow grass. Yes or no?
Oh, no way. It would be
Okay.
surprising to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so this is what we got. We got
Yeah.
mud tracks and we got grass clippings everywhere. And for all the good you think you're doing, which you have to cut the grass, right? You could lose a small child in some of these lawns nowadays. And so the question that I want to talk to you about now, Carl, since it's and you and I get to banter a lot about things, and I've seen you suggesting this, intimating this in some circles. What about if I had autonomous mowers? What about if I just had this little light? Gosh, I think I could pick up one of these Husqvarnas in this EcoFloat ring and throw it 10 yards. I
Yeah.
think I could throw it 10 yards. So it's not very heavy. And it probably could have been keeping up with the mowing right through the process. Maybe the autonomous John Deere above there, ride on not so much because that's still pretty heavy. But
Hmm.
it's not carrying a person, and it's probably carrying batteries and a mower. So talk to me a little bit, Carl, about especially this spring being an ideal example of how robots might actually help.
Yeah, if we go back to the 1/3 rule, right? We don't want to violate the 1/3 rule, because as soon as we cut off that solar panel, too much of it, right? More than a third, we get a response that's the plant's like, hey, I got to grow more. You just chopped off my solar panel, right? So anytime it gets wet and we're growing, i.e., this spring, and I can't get a mower physically out there because it's so wet and I'm going to get it stuck, I have increased my risk of violating the 1/3 rule, which means whenever I do get out to mow it, I'm hacking it down, and then it's just going to grow more in response. And one of the things, among the variety of things that are interesting about autonomous mowers, is they're so light, they can go and probably mow a lawn that is at saturation or near saturation, and get that grass cut and avoid violating the 1/3 rule. And yeah, it's got to go out every day, but man, it's just taking a little bit off every time. You're not going to get that excess growth from defoliation. Keep up with the mowing. You don't get the clippings all over the place. It's one of those things that's completely separate from it being a robot or autonomous. It just being light and being able to mow
That's
when
right.
you should mow
That's right.
could have some really interesting, like long-term consequences as we see turf quality into the summer. Do we see weed invasion? Because we're going to thin it out if we're violating that 1/3 rule. If we don't, we keep turf density up. Do we get fewer weeds into the summer? Those are the interesting aspects of these autonomous mowers that really are independent of them having a human on it or not. Just like, hey, it's
Yeah.
lighter. That's I
So
can
so
mow.
let's put ourselves in some people's shoes, right? Let's you just did a visit to a local park here in Ithaca and interacting with a few of the users of the park, and you I would say a real citizen advocate involved in your citizenship here in Ithaca. Read minutes from meetings, watch meetings on
Yeah.
TV. This is great, and so you're informed from a lot of perspectives, right? And you've seen this happening not just in the quality of the fields, but in any municipality. There's going to be this, we don't have the money. Oh,
Yeah.
we need better quality. Oh, we want to do this. If you had to be a pitchman, right? You're not selling anything, Carl. You work
Yeah.
here, right? We have non biased
Yeah.
opinions. Wouldn't you say to those folks, listen, if you find a way to get this to work, the quality and safety of your field will improve, will double in
Yeah.
quality, because the person who's riding a mower can now seed, fill low spots, do other stuff. So talk a little bit about how maybe autonomous mowing doesn't replace people, but allows you to reallocate.
Yeah, I think when you think of your classic community level sports field that has bare ground in the summer when it gets dry, it's got weeds, it's got uneven spots. Some of that is manifested from the early season when it's a heavy clay soil up here in New York. They can't get out to mow it. They have to go 2 weeks without mowing it, and they just bale hay. And whenever they do, there's tire marks even, and we get all these turf quality issues later. And when you think about, well, what is the crux of the issue? Well, it's probably the soil,
Mhm.
but I can't really tell them, hey, we got to sand cap this thing, or we got to core and top dress 30 fields that are all no irrigation, no drainage, native soil. That's not a feasible thing, right? So
No.
there's this balance of what's the root issue? Well, what's the feasibility of how we fix that? We love to fix the soil. That's not reasonable. What is reasonable is could we just mow on time? And these robotic mowers, if we mow on time, we mow frequently,
Big
get some
difference.
more density, that helps us, like you said, now we can do some other things. And is it expensive? Well, it could be if you do it on 30 fields, but if you try it on one field to start or two fields to start, and then you can see those real impacts as you
And
go.
maybe the
Here.
community starts to get involved in a public-private partnership, which we see,
Yeah.
in Metro New York, the Metro New York area, the New York City parks, all the conservancies that support the parks there. Now,
Yeah.
Carl, I mentioned earlier that moisture isn't limiting, and in fact, probably the only reason the darn grass isn't big enough to feed a whole bunch of Clydesdales around town is because it's been cooler. And we had a cooler than normal week, 4 to 10 degrees in some places below normal. And so now, as we twist it into growth and traffic and compaction and all the things we're talking about, I want to set you up with this presentation you brought to my attention from the Fremont, California School District, where they showed this is the big, this is the black box, right? And I know this is what you want to
Yeah.
talk about, but this is where not every sport, not every event, not every level of event, right? The difference between the men's soccer field and the women's soccer field, men's golf and women's golf.
Mhm.
But the more important thing is, well, how many games of baseball can I play this on this versus rugby? So here we go.
It's you said black box, Frank. Anytime I see some of these presentations, and there's a bunch of them out there, there's reports by, and I'll highlight one that's really good from Montgomery County down in Maryland. But you see these sort of reports out there, it's usually a natural or synthetic. And my question for a couple years has been, how do we get these hours of play for a year, like limits on a natural field or synthetic field? How do we calculate these? Where do these numbers come from? So you type it into Google, how many hours can a natural grass surface, how many hours can we play on it in a year? And you'll get Hoover Met Complex, or just a sports complex, I forget, somewhere down south in Alabama. And there's just in there 680 to 816 hours of play for a natural field down in Alabama, probably a warm season field. Okay, I go to a Martha's Vineyard article where Huntress, which is a athletic field construction company, they say 680. I don't know where the 680 number comes from, but okay, 680. Another place that says they get this from the FIFA standards for a stadium pitch says, well, only 240 hours per year. Okay, that's way less than those other ones.
Yeah.
And
Do
then
those people sell something, Carl? Those
I,
Grass Pro people, they're the ones selling something?
so that is sort of where I get the biases. Are they trying to get maybe more synthetic or natural fields? Maybe I see some bias in there. And then you get the Fremont report, which says 10 hours per day on a natural grass field, 2,800 hours per year. That's just, there's just no way that is possible. So I'm curious how they came to that number. So anyway, like which one of these numbers is reputable? Where do they get that data? Probably the best report is this Office of Legislative Oversight from Montgomery County in Maryland. Caitlin Simmons and Kristen Latham, they're just like data analysts. They're not
Yeah.
turf people at
Yeah,
all.
we
They go,
chatted with them. I
yeah,
chatted with them. Yeah.
and your name's in the report, Frank, and it is very thorough. And
Yeah.
one of the coolest things about Montgomery County is they have records of how often their fields are used. And this is what I'm interested in, like, that's really good data. How often are their fields used? Their grass fields, they have over 100 of them, about 490 hours a year. Okay, that's an interesting number. Their synthetic surfaces are like triple that, 1,500 hours per year. This is where I think we start to get a reasonable number for what is like field use on a natural grass field per year. Like 400, 500 seems like, okay, maybe we can keep up with that. And if you know how often your fields are used, now we can figure out, okay, if I use them 1,200 hours a year, that's probably too much for a natural grass field. And the next slide, Frank, is a different. This is from Marblehead, Massachusetts. I believe is like organic.
Marblehead, not
Marblehead.
Revere, not Revere.
1,900 hours on one single football field a year, which can't go well. It just can't go well. So um, I guess the data, like you said, I don't know where it comes from, and I struggle with how do I have a reasonable number to give somebody? And one of the things you and I are working on is like, can we make a tool for school districts who can figure out, can put in how many teams they have, put in the size of, how many PE classes are out there, and it spits out, here's how many natural grass fields you need, and here's how many synthetics you need. And it's hard to get that data, but what I can do is ask you, who has, what, 40, 30 years of experience in turf. Let me give you a scenario here. I'm going to give you a pretty typical high school. They got 7 teams that play on grass surfaces, 2 soccer teams, 2 lacrosse, football, baseball, softball. They have some PE classes out there. It's upstate New York, so you got 7, 8 months of growing season. Just sort of thinking about that, how many fields would they need to make sure that field quality isn't going to dip, to a sort of unreasonable level by
Okay,
the
this is
end of
so
the year?
great. This is so great, Carl, because while we don't have numbers for usage, we know that baseball and softball tend to be spring sports and not a lot of wear and tear on the grass, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
The dirt is the complicated aspect, as we've talked on the show many years about the issues in upstate New York with taking care of the clay in the spring for baseball seasons that start in March. It's got its own problems, but
Yeah.
those things from a turf perspective don't give me a lot of pause. And I can use one of the outfields sometimes to replace a lax field, right? Or a soccer field, maybe not a soccer field, but certainly a lax field. I think. I honestly don't know the differences in sizes. So I just bragged about the national championship lacrosse team. So the first thing I do is I'd work my way through the sports, the seasons, and then I'd look at this and say, listen, I know I need maybe 5 fields for this kind of traffic.
Yep.
And I'd say, I would use, you would use all of them at certain times of the year, right? Intensely, and try to rotate them. Again, the issue is when you put a field inside a track, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You got you got those, and I know that's what everybody builds. But the reality is that's the field that should be grass because it should only be for games, right? And go practice on other spaces. So if we're talking about practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I think 5 fields gives you a chance to use them, sacrifice one that you then can rest. I think you're going to have 3 fields in play all the time.
Yeah.
And 1 or 2 in rotation or completely resting. If they're all natural grass. Now, Carl, I hate to break it to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You want to pull this off, you're going to need sand-based systems and
Yeah.
you're going to need irrigation. And the hardest part of this, Carl, is you need somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yep.
So where does this leave us? Because I got a few things I want to add to when you're up against it, how to sort of move the needle a little bit and where science is going with these practices. So what's your point here now?
So this, and I think you already made this point, Frank. I was going to say, if we have a field that's being used at 800 hours and we want to take it down to, let's say, 650, is that a meaningful decrease if we just say, hey, instead of 20 hours a week, we're going to go to 18 or 16 hours a week. We're just going to use it a little bit less every week. Is that meaningful, or should I have dedicated rest periods for these fields. And it sounds like what you just told me was we got to rotate out, and this field needs to rest and recover for a chunk of time. It can't just be, hey, I know you guys practiced here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now it's just going to be Mondays, like, and then you'll have to play. It's like you need a chunk of time to plant more grass, grow more grass, and get it ready for more.
Yeah, and you got to be able to rotate the fields. This is going to be the value of some point of lines you can paint on and take off with the robots. And you can just say, go paint the Monday lines, go paint the Wednesday lines. I mean, that is a key to this. And again, Carl, you can move the needle a little bit with thick cut sod. I mean, you can go crazy. You can go if you got resources. You want to grow some thick cut sod, and we'll talk about this in a minute. So let's talk about the soils that have been cool, right, and wet, and so you're getting soil surfaces that get literally sealed up, right? But what you're surely to have through this spring sports season is thin turf and the likelihood for some weed germination. So looking at the GDD tracker for today, Carl, looks like we're really hovering around, the beginning of late germination for Long Island. I think we're still in the germination phase, and we've seen some in some southwest facing bare soil areas. Not so much in the turf area where we want it. Now, as we were talking about yesterday in our meeting, John Sorokin and the folks at Tennessee have done some work looking at how weeds respond to traffic, right? So here is how rotationally resistant, right, it becomes. And you can see clover and crabgrass are not as good as hybrid Bermuda grass. Now, very few things are as good as hybrid Bermuda grass. Kentucky bluegrass would be the one from a cool season perspective. But here's the argument that it is not as safe of a field with weeds in it, and it is not as safe of a field with weeds in it when you put a lot of traffic on it. So I think we've sort of established Captain Obvious here. So let's talk about weed management and start with the value of routine and repetitive overseeding. This study is so old. Dave Chinnery and I did this thing 20 years ago, where he did some repetitive overseeding on a high traffic area, came back a year later, and those same plots were controlling crabgrass. Now, we did not necessarily have the same success trying to bring this into the home lawn, because what you really need is routine traffic, right? And I think, Carl, I got this from you and Ben, right? I think Ben told us this. Seed doesn't do you any good in the bag, but it's time when you get this traffic with the cleating to get out there and do the seeding. And I'll show you an extreme example of this. This was the fields out by North Campus, Carl, before they put that synthetic field in there. This was fill that they put crappy grass on, and we went in and overseeded it quite a bit. This was like 10 pounds every week, like 10 pounds per thousand, but you'd only do it in your goal mouth. You wouldn't be doing it everywhere. I know the folks at Central Park do this in their goal mouths through the fall, but the key is you got to have regular traffic that thins the turf out and then actually provides enough cleaning in to allow the peach fuzz, sometimes you don't even see it, to try to keep up with the wear should you get a week break. I mean, all this needs really sometimes is a week's break. Now, of course, you can do the sodding route. But either way, right, we're talking about saturated fields. And as you mentioned earlier, Carl, this isn't inherently a grass problem. This is a soil problem. Yeah. So now you got to get out and decide how you're going to cultivate. Well, the first thing you're going to do is not cultivate right now. Absolutely under no circumstances would I recommend anybody outside of a sand-based system that can drain well should be cultivating. And we've had a lot of cultivation conversations over the years about using and improving soil compaction, whether it's the depth you do it, the type of time you use, the amount of time it takes to do it, a slit versus a hole, routine from once in a while. A lot of people use spoon tines. research has shown clearly if you're using these spoon tines, you got to do it at least 4 times a year. And that winds up producing a compaction layer where the dumb thing only goes in a couple of inches every time. You often have to do it when it's wet so it penetrates in further. And then we've got the Air 2G, some of these more sophisticated ways that a lot of smaller areas, especially on sports fields, along benches, targeted areas where you're, burping the soil with gas. On our Safe Sports Field website, we've got a variety of different ways to attack this issue from a cultivation perspective. What are you trying to accomplish? And what tool would be the best for it? Right. And we've been through this. I mean, Dave Minner did this 25 years ago. It's still good today.
Yep.
And in fact, Carl, on our Sports Field website, we still have the makings of a tool with all of these management schedules or cookbooks, as we might call them, right? Where it outlines the way you should do different things. Here's a year-round medium management schedule, right? Where you need to cultivate, where you need to overseed. And you can just look at this and find out, I'm not doing many of these things. So that raises the question for best management practices and the introduction of synthetic turf. And how synthetic turf now has capitalized on a lot of the things we've talked about, Carl, that there's ways of caring for synthetic turf, there's ways of testing synthetic turf. But now, thick cut sod, this is a shot of the Ready Play sod from Tuckahoe Turf, where you can see in this picture the soil it's grown on and the amount of top dressing that occurs to make this sod ready to go. Carl, you got an affluent school district, you could lay this field 4 times a year and just pull it out and put it back in. I believe in Southeast Asian countries, they're doing this where you go, you use it, when you're done, we roll it back up. And so that raises now the question of the hybrid systems, right? Where you're stitching in synthetic fibers into the field, right? That's binding to the root system. And I got more questions now, Carl, about fiber density. At what density you do this, because this is a piece of sod from one of the FIFA fields that have synthetic and natural grass in it. And you can see the synthetic fibers that were cut with a road saw to get this out of the field because it's on a black mat that the synthetic turf grows on. So what we know is from talking to John Sorokin, is that these systems are going to be what everybody plays on. It feels hard. They must have played around with some different stuff. If we had John, we'd fact check all this. Maybe we'll get him next week. We'll see. But either way, Carl, I think the point I wanted to make with all of that is, yeah, you can overseed. Yeah, when you can work the soil, there's strategic ways to do it. You better have the right tool for the right job, and you're better off with sand-based systems across the board. And then that's why synthetic adds so much value. You don't have to have any of those things for a synthetic field, and you get more use. But it's got inherent environmental issues that I didn't bring up. And then that brings up the question of the hybrid systems. And if they really move the fail point enough to make them worth the investment for 1,900 hours of use versus 500 hours of use, Carl. So listen, I stopped my rant there. I'm wondering if there's questions or if you have any questions or comments about what I talked about.
I think it's a nice just overview of all of the pros and cons that go into sports fields. And it can be as easy as like, hey, we start with overseeding, and then you do overseeding for a couple of years. And in all the research I was reading, Rich Harper and you guys did stuff down in Westchester, and year 2, year 3, oh wow, the overseeding really works. You can say that to people, but then you got to execute on that work. And then there's also like, hey, we can say you need to schedule rest, but man, the community wants to get out on that field and they don't care if it's icy and in March, like the guys up in Syracuse, where they're trying to
Right.
manage fields and they're
Right.
out there kicking a soccer ball in February.
Yep.
And then there's all these new technologies that maybe these give us some leeway if we can put 1,500 hours over here and get some field, some rest. Maybe that's where you start to be able to infiltrate with BMPs and how do we get someone who knows how to manage these things long term.
Yeah.
It's not an easy question, and it comes back to like I want data. I want to be able to put this into a tool and have it spit out an optimal situation. And the reality is that's going to be a hard thing to do, and that's why we like
But
to rely on
yeah,
expertise,
that's right.
like people
Yeah.
like Ben and Evan who are over here sending us notes in the chat.
Yeah. Good.
You, Frank, that
Yeah.
we really need
Well,
to.
and we got Chase Stroud. All of a sudden, we got sports guys all over the Northeast,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately, I'll claim Penn State as the Northeast, at least just for this show. But, hopefully Chase, it won't talk too fast for those guys at Penn State. Never mind. So are there questions or we want to wrap it up, Carl?
It was funny. Evan was asking, as you were talking about the field, hey, how does the soil composition factor into that? And you immediately mentioned that it's got to be sand-based.
Yeah.
Ben said the same thing. Hey, what about Dave Minner's work? It was like 2 seconds later, you commented
Beautiful.
on it. So
all right.
we're in lockstep with all our viewers. So
Okay. Happy weekend, everyone.
yeah, I think we'll see you guys probably next week. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.